Hi there, everyone. Lars and Scott back to talk about more of Dandadan now that we have seen episode 2. Brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And Scott, shall we quickly go over just the basic events of this episode?
Yeah, let's do it. So we end up starting this episode just after the crazy events of the first one. And so the two characters, they're having to walk home. They've got no way to get home. Their clothes are in rags or barely there. And so they're having to walk home and they have nice little conversation. They get back to Momo's home and find out that Okarun, because of the curse, can't go in. So Momo takes off the protection on the gate. They go into her house and they're able to kind of clean up and recover from the battle. And things start going downhill when another alien shows up and attacks them, basically seals them in the grounds of the temple little shrine area that Momo lives in, and they have to fight this giant sumo alien to survive. And in the meantime, they're having to figure out more about the powers and abilities of the psychic abilities for Momo and the cursed abilities that Okarun has.
Yep. And the way that they get through it is Momo being really smart, though kind of having to sacrifice herself a little bit by letting the sumo punch her through the wall. So that way there's enough of a dent that she can grab Okarun, and they're then technically outside the gate, and she can slap the seal back in place. And now the sumo alien has nowhere to go and is burnt to a crisp because he can't escape his own trap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great, except that because Momo took that heavy beating, she can't stay conscious any longer. And without her being conscious and using her powers to keep Turbo Granny at bay, the episode ends with Okarun being repossessed and it going really dark and potentially nasty. We'll see what happens next episode.
Which I'm looking forward to. This episode was a fun episode too. I feel like it doesn't quite reach the same insanity that the first episode did, and I'm all right with that. Like it doesn't have to be running 100% the entire time, but I feel like this episode took more time to focus on the characters' relationship, and that relationship is growing as they get to know each other better. I think that was a major focus. In fact, I think it was the main focus of this entire episode, because the fight was interesting, but it doesn't really progress the story at all. And so it was the relationship that held the larger dynamic in the episode.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love how you get this progression throughout the episode. So and this is where visual storytelling really comes in handy, because at the opening you have this constant erratic split screen going on, showing only one of them in each square rectangle, showing that even though they've just gone through this crazy experience together, they're not on the same level.
Yeah.
And as they're arguing, and as Momo's like, "Don't you dare use that name," his actual name, because it's the name of the guy that she hopes to one day marry. So she's like, "You're just Okarun. That's it. You're the occult kid. You're Okarun." And so it's clear that they're not necessarily getting along. But once they get to Momo's place and she helps him get on inside, and they really start opening up to each other, even though it's still really awkward and they're a little bit standoffish. They're now finally coming together. And by the end of the episode, it's very clear, not just because she's clutching him to her chest, but because of actually how they are treating each other, that the difference that was highlighted at the beginning of the episode has begun to melt away.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed how they were able to open up to each other pretty significantly this episode. I mean, in the first episode, they you had a lot of it was more background. It's like this is where they're coming from. In this episode, they're able to process that and realize like where that puts them now, and the other character is able to see that as well and start drawing parallels in their own lives. And so they're able to connect on a deeper level because of that.
And this actually gets into something that we were talking about before we began recording, which is the chemistry of
Mhm.
these characters. And this is something that is honestly difficult to write. Like you just like I hear this all the time from other critics, just write a good romance. Well, what is a good romance? How do you know that characters have chemistry? What does that chemistry look like? Because every relationship is unique and different. And that's
Mhm.
not an excuse to then be lazy or rely too much on like on a tried and true trope to ensure that the audience realizes that these characters have quote unquote chemistry. But what we get in this episode that I really enjoy is how the bickering and the miscommunication leads
Mhm.
to them then trying to reconcile,
Yeah.
and then the flushed way that they speak, like the halting speech, the
Yeah.
the double takes, the embarrassment.
Mhm.
That's awkward, but awkward is its own kind of chemistry. It's the
Yeah.
beginning of a good chemistry in many cases,
Yeah.
if the characters continue on the path that they're going.
Right. And they say like with chemistry, like you've got the whole opposites attract, but you've also got like like-minded people think alike kind of chemistry. You're getting both of that in these
Mhm.
characters. They definitely have their differences and they butt heads over that stuff, but they also have a lot of similarities, and because of both of these things, they're able to bridge that gap between each other.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's beautifully shown throughout this episode. Again, I go back to the split screen. Like the split screen is a great way of
Mhm.
representing that. Then leading up to just how close the camera zooms in on them at the end of the fight. Like this
Mhm.
is like it's them having won, but it's also a personal moment for the two of them.
Yep. And like I love how, because I was talking about in the first, like when we were talking about the first episode, you've got that craziness, and then you have to replace the craziness in the action with something else to keep the character interest. And in this, well, I mean the audience interest. And in this case, it's the character, like it's their relationship growing that's caught the interest, which makes our interest, it raises that interest when it gets in the action scene because we suddenly care more about these characters. And as we
Mhm.
get in the action scene, it like it's even more important. I don't feel like this action scene was the best example of that, but I do know based off of the readings in the manga that we did that it will become more and more important in the next action scenes that we're gonna be facing.
Oh yeah. And what you say right there, Scott, I'm going to use that to kind of segue on over into my analysis and critique of this fight.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know about how I break down fights, is that I don't just simply look at the mechanics of the fight itself, but I also think about what led up to this fight and what are its consequences. Because if a
Mhm.
fight doesn't have proper build up, it's just a fun action scene and usually very forgettable. The only way that you can make it not be forgettable is for it to have really excellent consequences that matter to the characters and to the plot, and that the buildup engages the audience so that way they're ready for this fight. Now, then, as far as the buildup for this fight goes, I really enjoyed how at first it made you think that this is like some evil spirit that's like come for revenge, or like this is what grandma had always warned me about. And so it's like the mystery, like, oh my gosh, because she took off the seal to help Okarun come through the gate. What's going to happen now? What horrible ancient thing has she let in? And then when it's revealed that it's not some sumo spirit, but that's this sumo wrestler alien, while the sumo wrestler alien can do some really cool things and some of the mechanics of the fight work really well, the really quick explanation of, oh, it's this kind of alien, and that kind of alien works with the other aliens that abducted you. So because we beat up those aliens, these aliens must have called this alien in for revenge. There we go. There's the answer. And it's like, that's so, and it's so insanely fast delivered that if you're not paying attention, you probably missed it. And then it makes no sense what the heck is happening. Even when you hear it, it feels really contrived. And then as far as the mechanics of the fight go, like the first half of the fight, the sumo alien should have crushed them. Plot armor is what saves these two. Once they realize what's going on, however, that's when it gets good. When Momo starts using her head, using strategy to beat the sumo alien, working together with Okarun to utilize his Turbo Granny curse. And even though they make some good headway, like they only have small victories before they get pummeled by a much greater enemy. It's only strategy that saves Momo and Okarun from being annihilated. So that's really cool. But it took half the fight for us to get to that point.
Right. I really like...
Oh, sorry. Say what you're going to say.
I really like how, like, in this fight, it's not about, like, really cool powers beating up other really cool powers and the cooler power wins. In this case, it's, we're surviving. And, like, the first episode was like that, too. But this time, they get the chance to actually, like, explore their abilities. The abilities aren't going to be what's going to win the game, but they get to explore it, and then from there they have to figure out something else. It's their minds, it's their, like, the strategy, like you were saying, that wins the game, instead of, oh, the cool, like, OP abilities win.
Yeah, exactly. The strategy is what makes this interesting, because otherwise this would just be a bunch of weirdness throwing itself at more weirdness. And that's one of the things that makes Dandadan work as a really crazy over-the-top story, is that it can make sense of its own insanity. And it isn't just throwing it at you and hoping that it can overwhelm your senses enough that you don't question it.
Except with this baddie, because he was super one-off, wasn't explained all that well, and wasn't tied into the story all that well either.
Exactly. And that's why this fight has a really poor setup, which is why it's not as engaging or as fun as it could be, but at the same time it ends up being a meaningful fight, because the consequences of this fight, which are important, lead to Momo and Okarun growing closer together. Momo is now better understands her powers. Okarun shows some backbone by willingly embracing the curse and relying on her to help him suppress the mentality of Turbo Granny while taking advantage of her cursed powers. And so this strengthens their relationship. This gives some much needed character development to both characters, as well as the standardized shonen power-ups, which power-ups are not character development, but it's great that we got character development alongside the power-ups.
Well,
so that was good.
Just a quick counterpoint to that, because I think the power-ups in this case do kind of cross into the, like, relationship building, because these characters, they're super knowledgeable about specific things, and then it's the opposite character who gets the ability tied to that specific thing. So with Okarun, he gets the ghost curse, while Momo, because she grew up with her grandma who's a medium, she knows all about this kind of stuff. Okarun, he's super into, like, aliens and espers and all that kind of stuff. Well, Momo is the one who ends up with that, and so they have to rely on each other to, like, figure out how those abilities work.
You know, that is a good point, and that does better set up the fact that they have to rely on each other and develop good teamwork skills.
Exactly.
Which of course then for the shippers at heart, like, oh, this means that they're going to get together. Oh, wait, we've got a lot of work to do here. This is the first of many steps, but it's the right step.
I think a lot of shippers make the mistake of, I think it's very likely these characters will get together, but if you rush into the relationship, it's not worth it. And so you need to have the patience to see them go through trials and be able to get to know each other better and actually like build that relationship up. And it's that time and experience that's needed first. You can't just go from like alpha to omega, um, first meeting to wedding and
Hmm.
onwards in like a single chapter. I mean, you could, but you're not going to have the emotional payoff from it like you would if it took the whole book.
Hmm. Or even the foundation through on which you can then build great moments for when they're a couple.
Hmm.
Because a relationship doesn't end with the first kiss and then riding off into the sunset. The story of a relationship continues on, or hopefully continues on far beyond that, and you can see that both in fiction and in real life, where the story is where the characters just get together real quick and there's not really much time spent to them getting to know each other
Hmm.
on any sort of deep level, where they can talk about the silly goofy things that don't matter as well as things that do matter, their hopes, their joys, their fears, their dreams. Those things then become essential to when they are actually together in a relationship. And then you can see how together they deal with trying to achieve their dreams and either
Hmm.
failing or succeeding, how they help each other overcome their fears, because fears are something that stay with you for a long time. And it's something that
Yeah.
it's great to have someone there to help you out. And how exactly do you keep the spark alive long after the burning embers of 1,000 suns have cooled down? It's because of the friendship that you've hopefully established between people beforehand. If you do not have those elements, you then have to really like spin whole cloth to justify why these people are even still in a relationship later on.
Yeah. I feel like, especially the culture you and I kind of grew up in, a lot of people don't like build that relationship properly before they get married, and
Mm-hmm.
they end up getting married way too soon. Like three 3 to 6 months is not proper enough time to actually get to know each other and build that relationship to the point you have ways to handle disagreements. And
Yes.
when you jump into that quickly, you're gonna have problems.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's nice that like they're in high school, they're not gonna get married yet. It's already like a cultural norm that we understand that even though they might get married down the road, they're probably gonna wait until after high school. We have time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to worry about that.
Yes. And that's nice, and it's kind of like a funny thing for us to talk about, because I mean some of the best videos that, or say some of the best viewed videos, maybe not the best made videos, some of the most viewed videos on our channel are the ones about shipping. And it's because people just love, oh, they just love the drama and the excitement of characters. Will they, won't they get together, and why they should belong together. What's far more fun is actually building those relationships.
Hmm.
And what we see between Momo and Okarun is that this relationship is being built. And that's important, especially for Momo, because how are we introduced to her? How does the show open up with her misconceptions of what romance ought to be, or
Right.
who the guy is that she wants?
It goes back to that classic writing advice: show, don't tell. You want to show the relationship. If you just tell the relationship, it's boring. And like I was saying before, there's no emotional payoff. There's nothing tying my heartstrings to these characters to want to ship them if I'm just told that they're in love. But when you show like
Mm-hmm.
all the awkward, embarrassing moments that lead up into like them going on dates, etc., now I really want to ship them.
Yes. Show us why they work.
Yes.
Show and also make us care about these characters. And that was what the first episode was there for. And this episode builds on that,
Yes.
which is another important thing. This is something that I see too many novice authors forgetting, is that the story is meant to progress as you go along, meaning that each chapter, each installment builds up on what comes before. too often, and like this seems like this should be a no-brainer, but far too often people write a snapshot of the story and then jump ahead to the next snapshot with very little go between, or I should say very little connection about how you got from that snapshot to the next. And that's not good writing, because you start losing very important information, not only for the plot but for the characters as well. So you can't hopscotch your way through a story.
And even if you are hopscotching, if you're like jumping in the timeline, you're still able to provide enough information like throughout the whole thing to create a like comprehensive story. Because like I've read several different stories. There's one I'm specifically thinking that like it does hopscotch from like one moment, like one scenario to the next scenario, but the actual like the characters and the relationship building, that's what connects everything together. And so it ends up being a better story as a whole, even though we're just getting those snapshots, and it's that relationship that connects it together. So you can do that, in my opinion, anyway.
I think you could do it. It requires then you to do really good heavy lifting somewhere else in order to help bridge that gap. And this is not to say that you need to show every single waking moment of your characters. It's just that we need to see that through thread of what are the important details, conversations, and moments that lead us up to the big stuff, like a massive fight in episode 2. If we had just jumped to them arriving at Momo's house, and then all the events happen afterwards, the episode would still be serviceable, but we would be missing that important we'd be missing some really important details in the conversation of them going back to her house.
Right. And I might need to go back to the first episode and look and see if it was like foreshadowed in any way. But I feel like they had the chance to foreshadow like this sumo guy in the first episode while Okarun's talking about aliens in the first place and showing off his magazine. If they took the chance, even for like a second or two, to like showcase this guy, and then in the next episode we saw him, like even just that little bit of foreshadowing would have been better than what we got.
Okay, yeah, I think it might warrant a second viewing. I from what I recall, he definitely brings up the fact that like there's a lot of alien sightings in America, and he states that this particular type of alien is one of those aliens that are seen more in the USA than in Japan. Like that is in this episode. So, and that does have a slight connection to what happened before, but I don't recall if he does drop the name of that particular species or if he talks about the sumo alien in the first episode. Yeah. Wow. and as of this point, we've now chatted longer than the actual episode is. Which is the way things go when you actually decide to break down a story.
yeah, that it is. But we can't let the episode go too long.
Yeah, exactly. And we've pretty much hit on like the big things. You now have heard the quick overview if you haven't yet viewed this episode. And we've talked a lot about the relationship, because really that's what it is. The action is going to be one of those things that a lot of people will point to, but honestly, it's the relationship between these characters, their communication, how they're growing, how they're learning to rely on each other. That is most important, because now that this fight is done, what is going to really guide us into the next episode is still the relationship, the growing relationship between Momo and Okarun. So, and based on what we know, since we've read part of the manga, we're going to get the fun introduction to the grandma, and I'm really looking forward to how they adapt that.
Well, and we get a lot more information about the curse and the Turbo Granny coming up, and I'm also really looking forward to that, because it's deeper than you think, and I feel like we are going to get more of. Well, actually, no, I know we're going to get more of Turbo Granny as the story progresses.
Okay. Real quick, I gotta share this, and I'm going to put into the video because it's hilarious. So I went to go visit some friends up in the northern part of the state last weekend, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go do it. We're gonna go have a picnic over at this place near Big Lake." And I'm like, "Okay, where is it?" And they're like, "Oh, just go to Gobbledon." And because of Dandadan on the brain, I didn't hear Gobbledon. I heard Gobbledon. I was just like, "Oh no."
No.
I was like, "Oh, Turbo Granny, you've tainted me." I didn't share that with them because I would have ruined the nice picnic experience.
That's still pretty good.
Yep. So, any parting words of advice that we should give before we wrap up this video, Scott?
Show your relationship. Don't tell how it works.
Yep. Really good. And I would say again, when it comes to writing fights, think about how you're setting them up, not just about how you execute them, which is also very important, and the consequences of that fight. Because we need to actually care about this thing. Because if it just happens in a vacuum, it can be as flashy as you want it to be, but then it doesn't mean anything to the story.
Yep.
All right. So, with all of that being said, hope that you guys keep an eye out for evil spirits that will try to possess you, or aliens that might try to abduct you, or sumo aliens who try to come after you. And if a sumo alien does, try to get it to put its hand on the ground. It seems like that works.
For a second until it cheats.
Yeah, for a second until it cheats. Then you're going to need to have something else. I'd suggest getting your hands on a cricket and blasting it away. But with that being said, if you want to find actually better advice than just that, then you can check out our other videos here on our channel. And if you're interested in other fun stories other than just Dandadan, we have links for some of the books that we have published in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.
Okini.